Digital viewers can go interactive by pressing the red button now, or use the text service from BBC Art.
Oh, it's a shame I'm watching this on normal television and not digital. Well, look what I found on eBay. Back when Walking with Beasts first aired, a small handful of digital early adopters in the UK and Australia could watch an interactive version with a ton of bonus content, including trivia pop-ups, an alternative in-depth narration, and, for episode 2 at least, 32 minutes of bonus videos. The only way of watching the interactive version now is through a rare DVD port of episode 2 that, through dumb luck, I managed to get my hands on. So, let's take a look at the interactive features that time forgot.
This is Walking with Beasts Interactive. Your chance to explore the fascinating world of prehistoric mammals. Use the arrow keys on your remote control to change narrator, or press the color keys to delve deeper. Green calls up instant facts at any time. Press yellow for the evidence, as told by the world's leading scientists. And blue takes you behind the scenes for the making of Walking with Beasts.
As for the broadcast version that the DVD's emulating, I've gone into the history behind that in another video, but the short explanation is that they aired a different version of the episode on 4 different TV channels that were playing in sync with each other. The interactive part was a custom menu that changed channels based on which extra you'd selected. Here's what each of those 4 channels were doing during the same scene.
This female's fate is being influenced by events far, far away in the Antarctic. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, the sea is freezing at the poles, throwing ocean currents into turmoil. For a whale that needs on average 80 kilograms of food a day, the slightest change in fish stocks is bad news. She is at the top of a food chain that is about to collapse, and she has just become pregnant.
These animals would almost certainly have lost all their fur and external ears. Instead, they had modified the skull so that they could hear vibrations through their jawbone. Further analysis of their skull structure has shown that this was actually a feature that the group acquired remarkably early on in their adaptation to water, when they were still living on the shores.
However, the forelimbs have remained. These are the flippers you find on all modern species, and Basilosaurus used them in exactly the same way.
By looking at the finger bones, we can see that Basilosaurus had all the fingers wrapped up in one big flipper that went from the shoulder to the tips of their arms. And these animals use their flippers just like modern whales do to help them steer. Basilosaurus has a whole other system to help keep them from rolling that modern whales don't have. You can see that the ribs are really expanded and they're made of very heavy bone, as is the breastbone. And that helps.
Creating the ripples and water droplets digitally in the computer would be impossible, so the animatronic is filmed in a small swimming pool.
Running and track.
The final stage is to make sure you've got all the important underwater close-ups, and for this, the animatronic head works best. Fortunately, the crew don't need to get their feet wet for this shot, because the underwater effect can be added later.
So, how did they port that to DVD? That's right, they used the multi-angle feature. Remember the multi-angle feature? Multi-angle sequences were a fairly common feature in the early days of DVD, and I've always seen them presented as just a way of toggling between video tracks, in the same way that DVDs can toggle between different audio tracks and different subtitle tracks. There are 2 very typical ways that multi-angle gets used on DVDs. The first is as a short little video where the viewer is encouraged to toggle between angles constantly to compare 2 things, like this animation breakdown. The other typical use case is for including on-screen visuals in different languages. A single video can seamlessly switch between segments made up of multiple angles and segments of just one, which has obvious storage benefits, but of course that doesn't directly mean much to the viewer. It turns out that the multi-angle feature is almost always underutilized, and I was surprised to learn that each angle has its own dedicated video, audio, and subtitle data. The DVD of Walking with Dinosaurs did take full advantage of this with its own picture-in-picture mode back in 2000. That disc has multi-angle segments for around half an hour of its 3-hour runtime. For Walking with Beasts Interactive, the full-length episode is on there 5 times. That's 145 minutes of video on a dual-layer disc to make up one half-hour interactive episode. There would be much more space-efficient ways of designing this if it was intended for DVD to begin with. Strangely, these two are the only discs I've ever known to use multi-angle in this way. I guess no one else saw the benefit in changing the audio or the subtitles. Because you're seamlessly flicking between several different videos, the DVD player has to be able to move its laser and buffer a different portion of the disc really quickly, so the video is physically stored on the disc like this.
The lagoon is
Dr. Mark Ewan
Towards the surface.
lagoon is transformed from a sanctuary.
is confident.
Formed from a sanctuary.
Swapping between videos isn't totally smooth, but it's honestly impressive that this functions as well as it does. And in fairness, if you were watching the original broadcast, it wouldn't be totally seamless either, because a television can't instantly change channels, so there would be a slight pause. They've emulated the TV controls using a DVD menu over the top of the episode. This is still flagged as a normal video on the DVD, which is allowed by the DVD video specifications, but I've found that it causes player-specific issues. For example, on Power DVD, I can't use the scroll bar to jump to a specific point, and on this standalone DVD player, I can't even fast-forward or rewind. These navigation features have not been disabled by the disc, so they must be technical limitations with the players themselves. From what I can gather, the experience of watching it on the DVD is virtually identical to watching it on TV at the time, but they weren't quite able to emulate the TV controls exactly. Given that this DVD version was clearly never released commercially, I have to wonder why it exists in the first place. They must have sunk some time into porting it like this. Maybe they just wanted a portable way to demonstrate the technology, or maybe it was a screener. The interactive features of Walking with Beasts did win a BAFTA, so it tracks that they might have sent out screener copies. But this copy can't be a screener, because it mentions the BAFTA on the sleeve and the disc art. But also, the metadata on the disc dates it to a couple of weeks before the series premiered, so maybe the disc was authored to be used as a screener, and then after it won a BAFTA, they reprinted it, and that's the packaging that I've got. Also, it's a pressed disc, not a burnt one, so they must have manufactured a reasonable number of these things. Putting the port itself to one side, the DVD's pretty bare bones. You can start from any one of the 5 angles, plus there's a generic trailer for the show, and a how to use text screen. And yes, Play Video and Main Feature actually are 2 different things. Play Video is just the normal episode as you'd find it on BBC One, complete with this thing that isn't technically burnt into the video, but also can't be turned off. Pressing enter does take you to the interactive version, so they must have made the deliberate choice to compromise the presentation of the standard episode just to demonstrate pressing red on BBC One. Main Feature takes you straight to the interactive version without having to press red. The original and in-depth narration, which are available with or without the fact pop-ups, are what you would expect. The original follows the story of the episode with some speculation as fact, whereas the in-depth track goes into more detail and broadly explains the paleontological evidence behind the episode.
The Basilosaurus will soon be able to reach the stranded Miratherium.
From the beginning, their first encounters with the Laurasiatheres are likely to have been unfriendly, as the huge carnivorous whales started to cruise their shores looking for an easy meal.
As for the pop-ups, it really feels like they were struggling for facts, because some of them are barely relevant or borderline unhinged. It's also a little hard to follow the narration and text at the same time. The 2 picture-in-picture tracks, Evidence and Making Of, are divided into short segments, and the other two streams let you know when a new picture-in-picture segment is about to start. In turn, every picture-in-picture segment ends with the narrator encouraging you to hop back onto the main feature.
In my hard sell of you're going to Florida for 4 weeks, compared with the reality, which in the main proved to be rather more difficult than I think anybody had anticipated.
Now that Armiratherium is off on its own in the prehistoric mangroves, it faces a new danger. It's heading straight for the jaws of the female Basilosaurus. You can see if it survives on the main feature by pressing red now.
There's nothing to stop you from just selecting one of these tracks and watching it all the way through, but they encourage interacting with the interactive TV. As far as I can tell, it would have been possible to automatically send you back to the main feature, but instead, they just make the gaps between segments really boring. There's normally supposed to be narration here. I wonder if the trivia pop-ups exist in part to give you something new to watch while you wait between the picture-in-picture segments? Either way, the longest gap between segments of The Evidence is only about 70 seconds, so you may as well just watch the whole half-hour track in one go. It consists of 17 segments that run for 1 to 2 minutes each. Those segments feature interviews with paleontologists, an analysis of the fossils, and clips of the beast's modern-day descendants. It even has its own next episode preview.
It's so mysterious. It was a creature found in Mongolia by the American Museum in an expedition in the early part of the 20th century. And it's approximately 45 million years old. And this skull here is actually one of the only specimens that's ever been found of it.
It's a pretty comprehensive selection. We see the evidence for not only all of the featured creatures, but also the environmental details in the episode.
35 to 40 million years ago, this whole area of the Sahara Desert was underwater. As I walk up this slope, we're getting into shallower deposits where you find things like mangroves and sandbars.
The tangled mangrove roots which once clung to the muddy Tethys shoreline have now all turned to stone, creating bizarre rock formations in the heart of the Sahara. They give clear clues as to what the habitat was like.
The making of has 4 longer segments that run for about 3 minutes each, and feature interviews with a producer and an animator. There's a familiar feeling segment about the CGI and the animatronics, but the real gem is the on-location footage, where we see the crew dealing with underwater filming for a couple of key sequences.
And as the crew ferried camera equipment back and forth, no one stopped to think what might lie beneath the surface.
Another thing we hadn't really considered at the time was sharks. I mean, we had scripted in a shark attack into our program, but hadn't really wanted to do it for real. And it was, on occasions, a little hairy when we were told of the presence of bull sharks, and on a specific occasion when a sand tiger shark swam underneath our platform, and we had a couple of people in the water at the time, and we had to sort of make the decision, do we bother telling them?
This multi-stream format was a pretty clever way of replicating the pick-and-choose functionality of a DVD on a linear broadcast. But once you port that to DVD, it makes absolutely no sense anymore and is the most awkward extras menu you could possibly design. As a fan of Walking with Beasts, I'm really glad that this exists, because it's got a bunch of extras that I've never seen before. But this disc means more than that. It's a hard copy of a broadcast format that has practically no public archive, and it's a small insight into a bold new future of television that never really arrived in the end.